Hello, and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the field of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today, we'll be talking to Dr. Touyee Thao. Increasing food production needs can sometimes put a strain on the environment. Waste from crop and animal production can exacerbate this problem. But when waste can be turned into a benefit, we can move closer to a world where both can thrive. In this episode, Touyee joins me to discuss how turning waste products into beneficial materials like biochar and compost can help move the needle in the right direction. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but before we dive in, we want to thank our sponsor for this episode, Meter Group. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Listen to their podcast, We Measure the World, to hear how innovative researchers are leveraging environmental data to make our world a better and more sustainable place at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi everyone, and welcome to the show. Today we have Touyee Thao with us today. Thao is a postdoctoral research soil scientist with the USDA ARS Water Management Research Unit, located in Parlier, California. He completed his PhD at the University of California, Merced in environmental systems with an emphasis in soil science and hydrology. Prior to UCM, he worked for 8 years at the Center for Irrigation and Technology at California State University in Fresno. Welcome to the show. So happy to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Abby. Thank you again for the invitation and for giving me the platform to kind of talk about this project that I did during my graduate study at UC Merced.
Yeah, we are thrilled to get to talk about it. To get us started, I think there's a few terms and acronyms that we just want to make sure that we define earlier so that if they pop up later in the show, people can track. So the ones that I have on my list are biochar or biochar, not quite sure on that one.
Biochar.
Biochar, okay. ET and deficit irrigation.
Yeah, so pretty much biochar is charcoal-like material, so it can be made out of anything. Any organic matter can be turned into biochar. ET is the combined, or in short, it's evapotranspiration, which is the combined process of water loss through evaporation and also transpiration. And then deficit irrigation is just management practices or practices of reducing irrigation for a particular crop. So you don't, let's say, a 25% cutoff in irrigation.
Yeah, so your research was looking into some co-composts and how they could impact some crops. So to start us off, can you just kind of give an overview of the problem you were hoping to address and some of your research goals?
Yeah, so just some background information. My project is part of a much larger project that involves a lot of PI. So we have 6 different PI, all from different background, ranging from soil physics to mechanical engineering to UAV to agriculture economic. And this particular project, the main emphasis or the overarching goal is to reduce our greenhouse gas emission, particularly methane emission, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide emission from an agriculture setting. So we focus particularly on dairy operation and also in almond orchard or nut crop cropping system. And the idea of how we plan to look at potential way that we can reduce greenhouse gas emission is pretty much diverting a lot of the waste generated from these operations, such as the dairy manure, and for orchard cropping system, it's the pruning of the orchard, the byproduct such as almond shell, walnut shell, these byproducts that are generated annually in an orchard. Yeah, so we're diverting these into and converting these into other or useful products such as composting in biochar, and then also mixing it together, so co-composting biochar and with the dairy manure. And the overall goal is that, we want to reduce the environmental impact of this operation, and with the goal to ultimately reduce the effect to nearby community that are living, next to the farm. So yeah, that's pretty much the overall objective of this big project. And in my project in particular, it's only a small part of that project, which is also again a two-part project where we have the first part is to do the co-composting process. So I have a colleague who did a laboratory incubation co-composting experiment where we pretty much co-composted 3 different biochar that were derived from walnut shell, almond shell, and then almond pruning, and we compost that with the dairy manure composting in the lab using the laboratory drum incubator. And that particular project, we observed a lot of reduction in greenhouse gas emission, particularly carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, which ultimately lead to the conclusion that adding biochar from different feedstock to their manure during the composting process reduce greenhouse gas emission, which ultimately enhance or reduce the global warming potential of these particular product. So after my colleague, we finished that lab study and published the result. My task is to now look at the agronomic effect of these finished products, right? So, and that's the particular project that I'm going to talk about today, where we look at, both the agronomic and environmental effect of these finished product for a fresh market tomato variety using a soil column experiment.
Yeah, a lot of really fascinating stuff in there. So I have a question about these waste materials that are gathered. Is it, for these shells in particular, I guess there's 2 questions. Is that just like naturally, because obviously like in an apple orchard, some of the apples just fall and they're just hanging out, or like animals will eat part of it or something. Is it that, or is it like a active, shelling process that is taking place, or how's that look?
Yeah, so that's a great question. California is very big in orchard crop system, with almond leading the production. So in order to produce the almond nut that people consume and use in different food product, there's always that byproduct, which is the almond shell and almond husk. So every season you will generate these kind of byproduct from the orchard. Our task was to, rather than using or wasting this product or just burning this product, let's convert it into something that it could be useful, which is why we focus on biochar. And something that I forgot to mention was that the biochar that we emphasize on were made from mobile unit. So the idea is that if we were to, our industrial partner, they pretty much haul in their unit and put it at the on-site and produce the biochar on site. So it's pretty much trying to reduce the carbon footprint that is associated with producing biochar if we can have it on site, and produce the biochar using the waste that the farm generated, and then apply that product back to the farm as an commitment to the soil.
Yeah, I think that helps answer my second part of that question, which was like, I think coming from Wisconsin, I forget that California farms can be like really, really big. So like, I'm like, oh, someone's out there with the shears and they just like leave them and you go gather them. And I was like, that wouldn't work at like a really huge scale probably. So it's interesting that stuff is just normally, gonna get burned and not really do anything. So I'm curious then how you're making these specific mixtures of these co-composts with the biochar in it, and how, like, whether that's ratios that you're looking at or just the general process of mixing it into something useful, as well as a description of just the methods you used at large for your soil column experiment.
Yeah, so going back to the first part of the project, it was looking at different biochar that were made from different feedstock that is locally available, and then also to look at different mixing ratios. So for that particular lab experiment, there were 2 mixing ratio, low rate, which is a 5% mixing ratio, and then a very high rate, which is a 20% by mass mixing ratio. And then for that project, again, it's just to look at, how does mixing ratio and feedstock influence greenhouse gas emission. So that was that part of the ratio. And for this project, I just look at the 5% because in general, anything that's greater than 5%, and realistically it's a lot of material, so it doesn't really make sense to apply that much out in the field. So we look at the 5% application rate.
Okay, and that 5%, is that referring to like the ratio compared to just the regular soil, or is that the mixture of the components that are going into the soil?
Yeah, so the 5% is the mixture of the biochar to the manure.
Okay.
So let's say it's 100%, it's 95% manure and 5% biochar, right? And then for the column study, we use 5% of that, right? Okay. So it's now 5% of the co-compost to soil.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I just wanted to make sure that I was thinking of things correctly. Yeah, I would imagine 20% it's a lot. Yes. Makes sense. So I'm curious about the soil column experiment. Tell me more, like field or lab settings that you set up and what, the different variations and controls. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the soil column study, pretty much when we figured that we want to do experiment using the end product, we were figuring out why should we do a field study using that product, or should we do a more controlled setting, right, like a greenhouse study. But we ultimately saying that let's do something in between. So for the soil column, we set it up outdoor so that it could plant, or the tomato plant can be exposed to actual climatic variability, not just in the greenhouse setting. And the most beneficial part of the soil column is that, we're able to control our inputs, and making sure that, if we apply this amount of water or this amount of fertilizer, everything is in that particular soil column, so we have less variability as compared to a field experiment where if we were to apply, let's say, a given amount of water in the field, we have to deal with efficiency, we have to deal with, leaks out in the field. So maybe one section may have too much water and the other section might not, soil type differences, stuff like that. So that's why we're like, okay, let's do something in between where we can control our input, but at the same time have a plant that is actually growing and being exposed to the environment. So that's a kind of description of the what is a soil column study. And then for us, we set out next to the UC Merced greenhouse study. So we made these wooden stand that are like designed to fit the column. So we have the column all sitting on top of these wooden stand, and with plant, of course, with tomato plant growing on top of it. And then adding more to the experiment, so we're testing the agronomic and environmental effect of these co-compost amendments. So we're looking at how does it influence water retention, how does it influence nitrogen retention and nitrogen uptake, plant health, such as, does it have an impact on crop yield in terms of both biomass and fruit yield. And then we also monitor greenhouse gas emission from these column study. So we kind of design a big chamber to go on top of the column as the season progresses, we have to kind of change the column because, the tomato get bigger and bigger. So we had to use a bigger column head for that. And these are stuff that we kind of measure and monitor throughout the season, again, or trying to quantify if, these finished product of co-compost have a benefit to plant health and plant productivity.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Touyee paper, The Effects of Different Biochar-Dairy Manure Co-Composts on Soil Moisture and Nutrients Retention, Greenhouse Gas Emissions, and Tomato Productivity, Observations from a Soil Column Experiment, and AgriSystems Geosciences and Environment is always freely available. If you are a certified crop advisor or certified professional soil scientist, you can take a quiz for continuing education units for this episode, which can be found in our show notes or on certifiedcropadvisor.org. Thanks again also to our sponsor, Meter Group. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Listen to their podcast, We Measure the World, to hear how innovative researchers are leveraging environmental data to make our world a better and more sustainable place at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. Thank you for being our sponsor. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, I really liked this research because I feel like there were so many different things that you were testing. So I liked that it kind of had that broad approach. I think something that would be helpful for me and hopefully other people. But if it's just me, it's fine. I guess like the term soil column is something that to me, I imagine like someone sticking a tube into the soil and like pulling some out. Is that the wrong thing to think of, or is that correct?
Yeah. So the soil column is actually for us. We use just a PVC pipe that is 15 centimeter in diameter, 53 centimeter in circumference, and 70 centimeter in height. That's just the shell of the PVC. We have to collect soil sample from the fill and then mix the soil, and then we mix on top of that, we mix the amendment on that, and then we backfill that onto the column so that it's you could say mimic a moisture soil profile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. This is helping me. Thank you. Okay, so you made your mixtures, you had your tomato plants growing in them, you were monitoring the impacts of these mixes, and the mixes you were using were the walnut shell mixes, the almond shell mixes, and the almond pruning mixes. So what did you find? What were your results?
Yeah, so in addition to those three, we also have control, which is like a bare soil with just only fertilizer, and then just composting, so the compost without any biochar additive to it. And then in addition, we also, because there's a lot of interest in whether these organic amendment can enhance water retention. So that's why one of the terms we used earlier was the deficit irrigation, right? We want to see if we were to reduce the amount of water that we apply to these treatment, do we see an effect or a beneficial effect with the organic amendment? So we have the 5 treatments, soil treatment, and then we also, half of the treatment, we impose a 75% deficit irrigation, meaning that we cut off the 25% of the water to the tomato plant throughout the growing season. And what we found, interesting, we found that we didn't see much of a differences in terms of the soil organic treatment. So across the treatment both in terms of plant yield, everything was very similar. The significance that we do observe is a big differences between the 100% and the 75% deficit irrigation, with always the 75% being much lower in terms of water use efficiency and also nitrogen use efficiency. But they have much greater, significantly greater sugar content, the tomato that were being harvested from the deficit plant. So that was for the yield component, so when we dive into other components such as nitrogen uptake, we measure leaf chlorophyll content, and we use that as a proxy for nitrogen uptake. At the end of the experiment, we pretty much dissect our soil column into different sections, and then we analyze those soil from the different section in check for nitrogen content such as nitrogen and ammonia, and then we also monitor leaching. So before we finished the project, we did a flush to pretty much leach the entire profile, and then we collect that water sample, and then we again also determine the nitrogen content in that as well too. So for those particular measurements, we observed that there were greater uptake in terms of nitrogen from the organic amendment. The control and the compost actually have very low nitrogen uptake, but that did not translate to, as I said earlier, we did not see differences in yield, which is what a farmer would want, is that there was no differences in yield from the control or the 3 or the 4 different organic amendment. So we were thinking what's going on, We did also monitor plant or canopy development. So throughout the whole season, we were measuring the canopy growth and the coverage of the canopy. And then we were also counting when the tomato is setting flower and setting fruit. So we kind of observed that when we first started the experiment, the first 2 months, we see that the canopy was significantly lower from the deficit treatment compared to the 100% treatment. But as we enter a much cooler month, we have very rapid growth in terms of canopy growth, and we did not see any differences in terms of canopy development across the treatment and also across irrigation throughout the entire growing season. So we're thinking, okay, so there's no differences in canopy development, but we do see higher nitrogen uptake. So, why didn't that translate to higher yield? And when we are trying to write up this paper, and some of our point that we kind of touch on is that maybe, it's the plant mechanism of, being resistant to environmental harsh conditions. So for example, in the deficit irrigation plot, the plant could be using a lot of resources for its canopy so that it can photosynthesize, and hence that there could be a chronic effect. That's probably why we see a big differences with much lower yield from the tomato from the deficit plot compared to 100% plot. And going back to and that particular argument, since we do also count when the tomato enter the flower stage and the fruit setting stage, we also observe that again these treatment that are in the deficit irrigation plot or enter the fruit setting at a much earlier, probably sometime like a month earlier than the full irrigation plot. So that could probably influence why we have the tomato where the yield was much lower but it have a significantly higher sugar content because they mature for a longer period of time. So it kind of go back to our, what we were interested in looking at, is there a ergonomic benefit? We do see that most benefit is that we do see a reduction in, nitrogen in the leachate and also in the soil profile for the amendment. So it does show that nitrogen is being retained longer, and that's kind of translate to what we observe from our chlorophyll content is that it's much higher in the organic amendment compared to the control, So that's a benefit for the retaining nitrogen. But in terms of agronomic, there was no differences. So we kind of conclude that it didn't really, across the treatment, our organic amendment didn't really have a big change in the agronomic benefit. So it's not a plus, but it's also not a negative as well. So it kind of maintains neutrality. And kind of going on this point, so we kind of talked about how we think that it's, these organic amendment, the benefit of having the, in the soil is actually being overshadowed by the deficit irrigation. So practices, deficit irrigation is a common practice that a lot of farmers use, especially when there's in a drought season. People tend to kind of cut back on their water. But this kind of show that, you have a organic amendment that, the intention of the organic amendment is to, help your agronomic benefit, it's in terms of crop yield. But these organic amendment is less effective if you're under a stress irrigation event, right? So although you do see a benefit in nitrogen retention, in terms of crop yield, it doesn't really translate to crop yield. So that's something that we found very interesting. And again, in our paper, we kind of talked about how it really does require a personnel to be an expert in many, discipline. So a farmer have to, have knowledge in soil science, plant science, irrigation science to kind of understand, what's wrong and, how to manage that, because you don't just apply these organic amendment expecting that, you're going to get a benefit in crop yield, because these organic amendment are intended to help, improve soil health and etc. too, right? But in our case, we didn't see that because we imposed a deficit irrigation, and, that kind of overshadow the benefit from the organic amendment. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that because you were gathering so many different data points that you were able to kind of tease out this mystery of what was causing these different reactions, which if you weren't gathering all of that, you would have a harder time, obviously, because you'd have fewer clues to the mystery. So I really like that. I love the idea of farmers and scientists working together, always. Big fan of that. And yeah, it is interesting to think, that if you were to apply these and didn't have these other measurements, you might think, well, it doesn't make any difference, so it's just not worth doing, or, who cares? It didn't change anything. But it is changing things. So I like that you were able to kind of draw that out from your data. I really enjoy that. So this higher sugar content in tomatoes, is that a bad thing? I don't eat tomatoes, so I don't know if that's like a something you want or not.
Yeah, so it kind of depends. They for processing tomato or tomato that they use for ketchup, towards the end of the growing season, they do cut off the water so that the tomato fruit can ripe and increase the sugar content for that. For fresh market tomato, which is the variety that we use, it may be a sweeter tomato, but I don't think it will influence the marketing of that particular fruit. So we didn't kind of talk about that, the higher sugar content is a plus for your agronomic benefit because, again, these are fresh market tomato. Earlier, kind of going back to like what you say about how you do really have to kind of work around your surrounding in that particular season. It kind of reminded me of last year when I attended the SSSA conference in St. Louis, and we have one of the very successful farmer. He came and he kind of talked about his farm operation and how he said that like there's really every season is different. He have to change his practices for that particular season. So there's no doing one thing every year and you are getting the same result. Like he changed his operation like constantly based on the different factors such as the environment, whether it's going to be a drought season or a rain, a wet season, like the type of fertilizer that you want to test, etc. So it all kind of come into where like you really do have to, farming is very complicated. It's trying to be a sustainable farmer at the same time trying to make a profit. It will really require that the farmer have to know a lot about soil health, irrigation management, in different environmental impact that could be associated to the farm. So all of these have to come in together, and either the farmer or the irrigation manager or the farm manager have to kind of understand all of this to kind of work around this rather than just focusing on one particular area and expecting to get the same result. So as you say, yeah, it's farming is actually very complicated.
Yeah, I love that. As you were talking, I was thinking about it's really an art form in a lot of ways. The more knowledge that you build out, the more deft and nuanced you can be with the decisions that you're making. And, me, like I grow cucumbers at home. They're really struggling this year. I kind of screwed it up. But it's, for me, I'm like, okay, I know that I can, water it this often, this much, fertilize it this often, this much. And that's like the full extent of my knowledge on it. But then you have, someone else who can observe, future weather patterns and be like, I need to have this very precise response, and just build out that mastery and expertise over time to be able to have that flexibility is extremely impressive. So as always, all of my love to farmers, they're amazing. And all the scientists that are helping them to figure out how all of that works. So this makes my heart very happy to be talking about research that pairs the two. Yeah. Oh, man. I should move on so I don't take up your entire day. So it seems like you have a really solid foundation here on a lot of data that you can work with, a lot of just preliminary research, both with those earlier experience and lab experiments, and now kind of moving a little bit farther out. So what is next in this research path? Where is this going?
Yeah, so I think every scientist can kind of argue that control experiment doesn't really reflect what actually happened out in the field, and that's something that we should all take into consideration, that the variability and complexity of field experiment. So ideally we want to expand this project to having multiple fill, multiple season, and trying to evaluate the long-term effect of the application. How long does these organic amendments stay in the soil, and do we see benefit after a longer period of time rather than just one season? So that's where, everybody can say that, we want to go there. Then that's probably the next step. In my case, that was part of, that project was part of my graduate study. So I kind of, after that, I moved on to a different project, and I didn't really have time to go back and do that field experiment. But we did, several of my colleagues, again, because this is a part of a very big project. So we did do, and we're able to publish multiple paper on field scale project that is related to this particular topic, but just not this particular project, research project that I'm presenting on.
Yeah, there's always more to learn, more arrows you can add to the quiver with farming and science both. So I have 3 questions left for you. The first one is, if listeners want to learn more about this larger research project or anything else that we've talked about today, where can they go?
Yeah, so of course, the first question is, the first answer is YouTube video do have a lot of things on, regenerative agriculture, using composting and biochar, and the benefit of that. There's also, in terms of literature work, the Tri Society published a lot of paper on this topic, composting, co-composting, biochar, etc. So there's actually a lot of references out there for young students, for young scientists on this particular topic. And then I think I'm not too sure about other states, but for California, we do have the University of Tropical Extension, and they do have specialists who are in covering this particular topic. So your local farm advisor and or corporate extension do have a knowledge already on this particular topic. So these are very good references to go and ask for if you're interested in the particular practice. Or if you're trying to see if you can use something at your farm, that will be the first people you contact, is the local farm advisor.
Yeah, for sure. Great resources for listeners wanting to learn more. Second question, if listeners then want to take that next step and get involved either with the research or applying some of these things on their farm, what can they do?
Yeah, so as I mentioned early on, is that like this particular research, we focus on locally available feedstock to use. So in our case, we use the manure from dairy production and also the residue from the orchard crop system, right? So it does really, as I mentioned earlier, biochar and composting can be made from different organic material. So it has to be a locally feedstock that is available in the area that you're in, and that's probably the most effective, because you don't want to be importing stuff from different state or from different region, right? So you want to focus on local scale. If you can have that on your farm, if you produce your own, let's say if you generate your own waste product and you want to turn that waste product into something that could be useful, that should be the first thing that you consider, is that do I have waste product that I generate on my farm on an annual basis, and then can I use these as let's say like a amendment that I can apply back into my field so that I can get some benefit from that, and then again talk to your local farm advisors to see if that's a plan that will be feasible for your farm, if your operation is will allow for that type of adding different manure and stuff like that to your field.
Awesome, great advice. Final question then. What is one fun fact that listeners would not know about you if all they had was your research?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One fun fact is that I am a musician. So other than doing science in trying to write paper, I also do play a very traditional instrument. It's called geng in my native tongue, but it's a bamboo pipe that have 6 notes. And then you play that particular note using your breath.
Yeah. I actually looked it up when I saw that on your worksheet, because I'd never heard of that instrument, and it's really beautiful. It's very haunting in some ways. It's a very unique tone. I encourage listeners to look that up if they get a chance. It's really awesome to check out. Wonderful. We love all of the different STEM things. So lovely to bring them all together here on this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing for the farmers out there and for taking some time to come on our show today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Abby. And again, thank you to the Tri Society for, putting these podcasts together. And again, really highlighting, some of the science work that is being, conducted and, showing that case to the listeners. So thank you for all that you do too.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Student Spotlight, where we highlight the work of graduate and undergraduate Society student members. Today, we'll be talking to Kaylee. Welcome to the show. Can you start us off by introducing yourself and where you are studying?
Hi, I'm Kaylee Miller, and I study at Michigan State University. I'm a PhD student in the crop and soil sciences.
Wonderful. And what are you currently researching?
Right now, my goal is to understand the physiological mechanisms and winter preparatory management strategies to reduce winter kill losses in winter wheat.
Great. And if you could have your dream research project, what would that be?
Yeah, so my dream project, I think it would be really interesting to, rather than look at the overall yield of the winter wheat, so the quantity, I think it'd be really interesting to look at the quality of the yield as well. I think that's really important. We want to make sure that we have good food for everybody to eat and not just at, massive amounts. Like the quality has to be to a good level as well. So I think that'd be really interesting to get into that side of things.
Well, awesome. If you'd like to get in touch with Kaylee about her work, we'll have her contact information in our show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today, and best wishes on your future studies and career. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. More information can be found in the description below. Thank you.